Step into the shadows where stories linger and legends whisper. Welcome to Loot, Lore, and Lights, a realm where the hunt for treasures is dangerous. The tales are shrouded in mystery, and the glow of a screen beckons like a distant, flickering flame. My name is Adam, and I'm your guide through this twilight world of games, books, movies, and shows. Together, we'll uncover hidden secrets, delve into forgotten sagas, and explore the darker corners of the stories that captivate our souls. Hold on tight to your courage, because the journey begins now. Hello and welcome. It is the first show for Loot, Lore, and Lights. And tonight we are going to be covering The Last of Us Part 1. We're going to be comparing the video game versus the HBO TV series. A few of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to go into detail about what differences we saw between the game and the show with the plot. We're going to talk about the cast. We're going to talk about the ending. And I think we might even speak a little bit on what next season will hold for us. To kick things off, there were 3, maybe 4 big differences that I took. Number 1 being Tess's death. Tess's death is way better in the video game as opposed to the TV series. In the series, she ends up, I guess, kind of making out with one of these infected, which we'll get into another difference we'll talk about in a minute. And, she goes out saving Joel and Ellie by causing the big explosion. In the game, to me, it was a lot more, I guess, dramatic and impactful. Joel and Tess's relationship is never really, shown or expressed. Everything is implied that you see. And when you realize that she's infected and you're being chased by Fedra, she decides that she's going to stay behind and buy you guys time. And as you're going up the stairs and moving into the next areas, you can actually see Fedra come in, and she gets into this Wild West gun shootout with them, and ends up going down while delaying to give you guys time to try and escape. To me, that was a lot more badass in that moment, and more impactful, I think. She already knows she's going to die. She's been bit. It's one of those things where the infected were coming because of the link or the colony through using these tendrils. Whereas in the show, another difference is that there is spores. You can't get infected by somebody, injecting tendrils into you. It's all encountered through the spores. And so she has been infected. She knows she's going to die. She could kill herself, or she could try and go on as long as she could with you guys. But in that moment, she wants to go out in a blaze of glory. And she really does that. And it's quite impactful for that moment when you're escaping and you hear Ellie. She doesn't want to leave Tess. It's just much better to me the way it happened in the game as opposed to the show. The second big difference happens in the very next episode, and Neil Druckmann actually spoke on that and said that he wanted it to be some kind of I guess a comparison to the way Tess went out and what you would see with this love story they're going to tell between Bill and Frank. And in the game, Bill is crazy. He's this very possessive guy, which in the show he does come across that way too, but it's more so in the game. And we didn't get all the interactions between Ellie and Bill the way that we would, and the little snippy comebacks and one-liners they have with each other. And it tells this very beautiful story. Don't get me wrong, it is a very beautiful story, a love story between Frank and Bill that takes place, over decades, that these guys have found each other, found love in the post-apocalyptic world. And in the show, Bill realizes that Frank is going to die. And so he comes out with a way for them to basically, end life or exit life together. You don't see the Ellie and Bill confrontations. You don't actually meet him. Joel and Ellie don't. All they find are the dead bodies. To me, it's better in the game because you actually get a chance to see just how crazy Bill is. And you end up, he makes all these small little, gestures about Frank and how, he says he's got a partner and you can't, get too close to somebody because that's what's going to screw you over in the end. When you eventually do come across Frank's body in the game, Frank has hanged himself, and you find out it's because he's infected. But, there's a note nearby Frank's body that says something along the lines of, like, I guess you were right. Trying to leave this town will kill me. Still, better than spending another day with you. And it was not this perfect little love story that's portrayed over decades in the show. It is just this, it could have been a shorter amount of time. It wasn't a massive love story that is played out to be in the game. And it's almost a little bit anticlimactic whenever you do finally find his body, and you've heard Bill talk about having a partner and how important it is that you don't get close to anybody because that's what's going to screw you over. But then, you finally find his body, and it's basically like a big FU to Bill that, Frank, he was happier going out and getting, infected and killing himself rather than having to spend another moment with Bill. And it's just much, I don't know, I guess a different interaction that you experience in the game, because the game does portray this sense of like hopelessness throughout the entire story. And that is just, I guess, another nail in the coffin. And I did like the episode. Like, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a beautiful love story. But I like the way it played out in the game a little bit better. The next big difference for me came early on, and it's in the first episode where Joel actually reaches out to find Tommy or to find out what's going on with Tommy. And, there's some serious concern there, like they're keeping in touch. In the game, they are not keeping in touch. There is not this overlying factor of Joel needing to get out there to find out if Tommy's okay. They have not spoken in years. There was something bad that happened in the past. You don't know what it is, but you know that they are not on speaking terms. It goes so much further in the game to where Joel almost doesn't want to go to Tommy. And then when he finally gives in and goes to Tommy, there's this tension between the two of them. And he doesn't even get into Jackson, which in the TV show, he does go to Jackson. He sees the inside of it. He sees their communist environment. He sees, I think we even see, his wife at that point, which you do in the game, but not to that extent. They're trying to repair a dam, I believe, to get power to Jackson, which, once you get into the second game, you do see the powers going, but in the first game, it's already, or in the first season, it's already powered and it's already running. It just felt like the tension between Tommy in the game wasn't as clean, I guess. And I actually did enjoy the way that they did the TV show and manipulated that storyline to where Joel would have kept in touch with Tommy, at least to some extent, for what he could. And he was worried and concerned for his brother who was on the other side of the country, and just thinking about that from a personal perspective, like knowing that the world has fallen out. You guys were both down in Texas, and now you've gone your separate ways. One goes east, one goes west. You're still trying to keep some form of a connection. All of a sudden, one of them goes dark. And if you're in that situation, you've really got to think in your own shoes. Like, what would I do? Would I be willing to try and risk, trekking across the U.S. to try and find out what happened to my brother, knowing that it's probably going to be the end of me? And, it's easy for you to sit there and say, like, it's family. You would definitely do it. Why wouldn't you? Or, no, you wouldn't do it. That's crazy. And I think that that's what Ellie really comes into play, because the last time in the game when he sees Joel, at least that we're aware of, is when Sarah is around. And he watches Sarah get killed. He sees Joel go through this trauma. And to know that Ellie will eventually win him over to become like the daughter he never had, it's kind of uplifting, I guess, in a way, to make it to where he would want to trek across the United States whenever he realizes that, he needs some kind of help. He's not able to find the Fireflies to give Ellie off to get, I guess from the game's perspective, to get the weapons that he was supposed to have. And now he really needs Tommy. And you get to see that relationship kind of blend and blur and much more appreciated in the way that the show did it as opposed to the game. Now, the biggest difference between the game and the show to me are spores. And I know that they've come out and said that there is still a chance that they will use the spores. They were, prevalent throughout the entire game. The characters cannot go into any areas where there is not clean air. If they do, they'll become infected. So they're very reliant on having masks and air filtration systems to take care of these, issues. It's what allows them to see Ellie truly is immune. In areas where Joel and Tess are having to wear masks, Ellie's walking freely, breathing the air, nothing's happening. She's not infected, she's not changing. In the show, it's tendrils. And I don't like that. I didn't like that change up from the game. I do understand it. They do not want somebody as ruggedly handsome as Pedro Pascal to have to cover his face for a good chunk of the show. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that appreciated they were able to look at him the entire time. But to me, it took away from how dangerous it was in the game. The tendril network that they have where you could step on one of the infected here and 2 miles away, you could ignite a horde. Very interesting concept, neat concept, not The Last of Us, to me at least. And it was incredibly off-putting, I guess. And then when you see Tess try to stand up to the horde that is coming after them because of what they've triggered, the one to, I guess the nicest way to put it is he makes out with her. He gets up there, shoves his tendrils down her throat. It's a very creepy, weird, uncomfortable looking scene. Did not like it. Wish they would have kept it with the spores. Hopefully we will see that. I know that the showrunners and stuff had said that when season 2 comes around, they're not completely outlying that spores could still be a thing. It just, they don't want to cover up their faces. It does take away from seeing reactions and really, just the facial expressions of acting, and not to mention the look of the characters, because there are going to be some people who are going to watch these shows specifically for who the actor is playing that role. Whether it's the actor playing Joel, Tess, Ellie, whatever the case is. It's just, to me, it was off-putting that they didn't wear masks, even though Ellie wouldn't have to wear a mask unless she was trying to fit in. Speaking of the actors playing their roles, let's get into that. Just doing a comparison between who voiced the characters and then who actually played them. If you were a fan of the game and played it back in, I think it was 2013 when it came out, you have these expectations in your head built up from growing attached to these characters from the hours you spent playing the game. I will say, Pedro as Joel was great. I loved him playing Joel. It kind of hurt a little bit when it came to the voice, just from having that expectation built up of what Joel is going to sound like from playing the first and the second game and the show finally coming out. But to me, Pedro, he did a great, phenomenal job with the role. Made you forget, I don't want to say completely forget, but because everybody loves Troy, but made you really believe he was Joel. To me, that was not the case with Bella Ramsey as Ellie. Now, what I will say is after watching the first season, I love the way that she acted Ellie, and I enjoyed her playing Ellie. She was not Ashley Johnson, who I had built up in my head from hearing the corny puns, the quips with Bill, the fights with David, and even going into the second game, hearing that same voice. I did really enjoy how the piece of the storyline in the series, they did bring in Ashley Johnson to play her mother. And that was nice to hear Ellie's voice come through her mom. But to me, it could have been a better choice visually for Ellie. But acting, I thought Bella Ramsey did a phenomenal job. And she eventually won me over. And, she was Ellie, at least for how she was playing the character, not so much for just her looks. I loved Anna Torres Tess. I thought she did a phenomenal job. Nick Offerman as Bill. I really wish I could have seen him interact with Bella Ramsey as Ellie, seeing their quips back and forth. But again, that episode with Nick Offerman as Bill, and then his relationship with Frank, and how it spanned over just years of their growing together and realizing like it's basically them against the world until the time comes when they exited the world together. Moving down the line, just talking about two of the next characters, which would have been Lamar Johnson playing Henry and Kayvon Woodard playing Sam. I thought they were excellent choices. I especially loved the twist with Sam being deaf and being played by a deaf actor. It brought a different dimension to that role for two characters who, again, like The Last of Us is very bleak. It's very dark. Nobody is safe. And you see that over and over as you continue through the game. And even as somebody who's played the games to know what is coming, it really hit home to where it was like, man, I don't want to lose these guys, especially seeing the way that Sam was portrayed. I'm only going to talk about a few more. Let's talk about Gabriel Luna as Tommy. I wasn't really feeling it. Didn't think he was a great Tommy. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that'll feel otherwise, but I just didn't get on board with the small sample size that we got to see of him. Meryl Dandridge, I think was her name, the lady that played Marlene, and she voiced Marlene in the video games. Perfect. Loved hearing it. Loved seeing it. There's not enough good things I could say. I wish that you saw that more when people were able to play their characters in the live action that actually voiced it. Just thinking of how it plays out to the, really, I guess is more or less the fan service of those of us who have been hearing these characters for a while, now getting to see them and see them in a live setting as they're portraying who they were in that world. And the last one will be Scott Shepherd as David. He was the cannibal creep. I really loved how they had Troy Baker, who was the voice of Joel in both the games, play a member of his crew. And getting to, Troy Baker got to have an epic little death there at the end of his episode. It was nice to hear his voice, but at the same time, as somebody who played the games, it's like, man, that we missed a good one there. But Pedro, from a visual standpoint, fit the bill a lot better than Troy did. It's just that's the voice that you hear and that's how you hear Joel. Like when you see him in the video game, you hear Troy's voice, and that's who Joel is. So nice that they incorporated both Ashley Johnson, who voiced Ellie, and Troy, who voiced Joel, to be in the show. And there was actually one more person who had a cameo who voiced Abby from part 2, which would be in season 2, Laura Bailey, and she was a nurse there at the end that Joel took out to save Ellie's life. And that seems like the perfect time to roll right into how the ending was for The Last of Us. And it was a very controversial ending to me. The Last of Us games are both very emotional, controversial pieces of work. And that's how you know that they're good, is because they do evoke an emotional response in anybody, whether good or bad, when they play the game. And just putting myself in Joel's shoes, especially as somebody who has a daughter, it's one of those things where you're told she's the savior. She could be the savior. We don't know for sure, but she's immune. We need to dissect her and figure out what it is that makes her immune, and we will see if we can replicate it. To me, that would not be good enough. And I agreed with Joel's choice, as bad as it sounds, to take care of his, pretty much daughter at that point by any means necessary. You have to do whatever you can to protect those closest to you, especially when it comes to situations where they can't look after themselves. And it is one of those things where Ellie did want that opportunity to try and save humanity. But to Joel, as the father figure, he thinks she isn't old enough to make that choice. He's been screwed over by the world enough. He has had enough trauma that he is not going to let them take Ellie from him just on a hope. Maybe it changed if they said it was 100% she could save humanity, but the hope was that she would be able to save humanity, and that was not good enough to Joel. And as a father, you want to be as transparent as you can with your kids. And I'm not saying I would have lied to my daughter at the end of when they're walking and she makes him swear that they couldn't do anything. They couldn't, do any operation or whatever to save. Like, there was nothing they found to prove that they could save humanity. And he straight up looks her in the face and lies and swears to it. Again, he has had enough bad in his life that to him, I think that it's one more little lie to protect what is going to be his personal bubble was going to be worth it. I think things would have been different, had he not been through decades of trauma and just terrible people, terrible situations. It really morphed him into who he was. And he never let go of Sarah, and Ellie is Sarah. Ellie becomes who Sarah would have been. And no matter what, he was going to protect her, even if it meant killing everybody that potentially had a chance to save the rest of the world, because chance isn't good enough when it came to Ellie and his, who was his daughter. We're going to see this come back up, especially once we get into season 2. We're going to see more come out from that choice. And for those of us who have played the games, we really cannot wait to watch the reaction of those of you who have not. Those of you who are only there for the TV series, and you're going to watch it week by week, because those of us who know, we're going to be watching you. I guess I'll end it with this and say that one thing I am excited for is to see how Kaitlyn Dever is going to do as Abby. There's been, other cast members who have been put out there. She was the one I was really wondering how she was going to do. And I also wondered if maybe they go back and recast Ellie as someone else. But, they didn't. They kept Bella Ramsey. She is the same age as, or at least I guess at the time, I'm feeling she was about the same age as what Ellie's supposed to be in the game. Ellie just looks older. Ellie's been through a lot more in the games, which is why she did age a little harsher, look a little bit older. If you were hurt during season 1, if you thought, man, this show just has trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, season 2 is going to be rough on you. It was rough on us to play the game. And like I said, it creates such an emotional response. Love it or hate it. And that's what makes it great. I will be putting out episodes talking about the new season. Probably bring on some of the people in my bubble that I'll talk to about these shows as they air. They may not be super quick reactions, but they'll still be out there and we'll talk through it together. It'll be a fun little thing for us to go through. I'm not sure where we're going to go for episode 2 just yet. I do have potential guests that I'm going to be talking to some things about. I would love to hear from you. You can email at lootloreandlights@gmail.com. That would be an easy way to send suggestions over for what games, books, movies, whatever it is that you want to talk about. I just finished Severance, so I thought about trying to do an episode on that. Might come forward. Currently, Monster Hunter Wilds is another thing with Title 1 update coming out this past weekend that we could do a little discussion about, especially with some of the guys that I play with on that. First Berserker Kazan, we've got Assassin's Creed Shadows. We could look at older titles. We can talk about what's, some of my favorite ones were. Even going through looking at, movies or even other series. I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in to our first episode. There will be many more to come. The goal will be to try and drop them weekly, so I'll try to hold to that as best I can. But again, my name is Adam. I've been your guide through this crumbling landscape as we talked about, a game versus a show. And in the future, we will work together to sift through the ashes of culture and piece together the tales that remind us of what once was and what could still be. The signal is weak, but the stories are strong. Take care.